Episode 84, Leadership in Motherhood by Being a Better Listener with Marianne Hill.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
We associate CEOs with big companies that are powerful and make lots of money. But some of the most important CEOs are mothers. Being a mother is one of the biggest leadership roles a woman can hold, and yet so many feel they are simply just janitors that are good for nothing more than cleaning up one mess after another. Coach Marianne Hill wants to help young mothers realize that they truly are the CEOs of their homes. After getting a degree from Gonzaga University that focused on servant leadership, Marianne sees the perfect correlation to mothers and leadership. There are so many tools and skills mothers can learn to be servant leaders in their homes, but on today's podcast, Marianne focuses on the skill of listening and covers three main areas of listening that include listening to oneself, listening to others, and listening to ask better questions. If you are a mother and looking for a promotion from janitor to CEO, this is a great episode to help you on your way.
I get to have another coach on the podcast today who is local to me. Marianne Hill is with me today, and we don't live too far apart. So we do get to run into each other and see one another occasionally. And I love that. But Marianne has been on the podcast before, and I'm excited to have her on again. Some things have changed in her life between now and then. She's completed a master's program. It's so exciting. Marianne, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I am an educator and a life coach. Like you said, I just finished my master's degree in organizational leadership at Gonzaga. And I've been tying everything I've been learning in this leadership program to motherhood. So I'm super excited about this topic and applying it to my coaching. I love good food, good chocolate, hanging out with my adult daughters. In my free time, I like to take walks with my friends, obsessively organize my calendar, read good books, watch good movies, good story. So that's just a little about me and what I've been doing and where I'm heading. So I'm excited to be here to be able to share that with the listeners.
Oh, well, I am so glad to have you. And I think you have a grandbaby too now since the last time you were on the podcast, right?
Yeah.
So much fun.
8 months old. She's super cute.
So Marianne, yeah, I think this is so fascinating as I've been kind of looking over our notes and the things we want to talk about today and your connection with motherhood and leadership. And I don't think that we connect the two very often, yet they, in my mind, are also inseparable. They're like inseparably connected. Is that a phrase that I can use? I think it's true. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah. So I was the same way. I've been in this organizational leadership program and kind of felt like an outlier because I wasn't in an organization. A lot of people were like in the army or corporate. And I was like, well, I work from home and I work by myself. And then as I was contemplating this final project, like you said, it seems obvious once you figure it out, but it suddenly dawned on me. I was like, oh, every one of these skills applies to motherhood. Either a mom has to have this skill just to survive being a mother, or they can develop these skills more consciously and become even better moms. And so I went back and I looked, and basically all my papers, I had tied this into motherhood without realizing it. Like you said, they're inseparable, but we don't talk about it enough. I think the prevailing cultural belief is still like, well, you're just a mom, you're kind of losing 20 years of experience, but good job. And I think it's just the opposite. Like motherhood is the ultimate training ground for leadership. You are getting experience that you could get in no other way as you are raising your family. And that's what I want to bring out to moms and help them just love this role and move from like being janitor in their own home to being the CEO of their own home and their own lives. And I'm just super excited about this because I want moms to love motherhood and to realize that they're becoming leaders and that they can raise heroic humans who will also become leaders for the next generation.
I am laughing so hard at your comment from moving from janitor to CEO, because I'm thinking back to my days of having little people all around, and it does feel like it is just one constant cleanup after another. It is very much like a janitor position, if you think of it that way. So anyway, I'm really excited to have this conversation because I love my role as a mother, and it actually was really hard for me to transition into working a little bit, not because I didn't think I was capable. Well, there was some of that too, but because I felt like I was having to let go of some of the ties of, I didn't feel like I could hold on so tightly to that title of mother and also do some work at the same time. And that's a whole different episode, but we talked a little bit about why the connection of motherhood and leadership is important. I think seeing that connection can shift your perspective on a lot of things, but I think we could probably develop that connection and that belief a little bit more. So tell me what are some of the results of viewing yourself as a leader versus the janitor or whatever?
So this is really fascinating. The emphasis in my program that I was in was called servant leadership. And so I've sort of adapted this to motherhood leadership. And servant leadership is defined as the natural feeling that one wants to serve first, with the best test of leadership being, do those who I serve grow as people? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely themselves become servants? And I think mothers naturally do that. We do that by default. Like, your body will steal from you to give to the baby before you even have the child. Like, you are serving that child before they're even born. And of course, all of us want our children to become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely themselves to serve others. So this idea of servant leadership has actually been studied and researched over the past many, many years. So it's not just this idea that's out there in space, like, oh, that sounds so great. They've actually done research on it. And there's individuals and companies that put this into practice. Some companies like Southwest, Starbucks, Men's Warehouse, Franklin Covey, all apply this idea of servant leadership in their business. We have examples of servant leadership in people like Simon Sinek, Nelson Mandela, and I think the ultimate example of servant leadership would be Jesus Christ. By serving others, he became a leader and showed us how to live our lives. And so some of the observable benefits of servant leadership that have been studied include self-actualization for the follower. So think of the follower as our children, greater team effectiveness. So the team would be our family, a positive impact on society, self-healing for both the leader and the follower. So it's healing for the parents and the children, ethical behavior, creating value in the community, better financial results, humility and empathy, better listening, shared communication, shared power and control, and positive environment. So there's all these studied effects. And who wouldn't want those results for their family? And those results are in your reach as a servant leader, as a mother leader, by applying these leadership skills in your home.
I hear the word servant leadership, and I love that phrase. I think it's important to also separate, like, because sometimes when we think about servant, we think about the person that's just laboring away and doing all the hard work. You know, the servants are the people that have to do all the heavy lifting, but that's not the kind of servant, obviously. And the things you've said, we know that's not what you're talking about. But I think it's important that we really clearly don't slip into that belief that thinking, yep, servant leadership is just someone just does all the heavy lifting. They just do all the hard work and they do the things that nobody else wants to do. It's a much different connotation, which I know that's what you were talking about. And I don't think anybody will take it as that way. But I just know in my mind, sometimes when I hear the word servant, that's what I think of. And we get to think of something different, more of like service feels different to me than the phrase servant.
Yes. And that's definitely something that I've hashed out in my mind a lot going through this, especially when I'm saying I'm taking you from janitor to CEO. Like,
yeah,
seems like a servant leadership seems like an oxymoron, but the beauty of it is that when one has the desire to serve first, you harness your power because you're in power and you're no longer working to feel better about yourself or to make others feel a certain way. So you're no longer in this manipulative kind of mode. If your pure desire is to serve others so that they can become better human beings, then you're not going to become their slave or start doing things for them that they could do for themselves, because that doesn't help them become better human beings. You're working in service of all the other humans in your home and helping everyone, including yourself, to become the hero of their own story and to become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely themselves to serve others. So there is that distinction because, yes, English, we have different ways of feeling words. They have different connotations, but it's this in service to others, which is different than being a slave to others or being subservient to others or, being the janitor.
Yeah. Well, and there was a phrase that you said that was, oh my gosh, and now it's slipping my mind, but it was, being the hero in your own story. And the only way we can be the hero in our own story is being careful that we don't slip into that servant janitorial position. We have to look at things from a higher level.
Yeah. Which is the leadership rather than I'll just do it because it's easier for me to do it than to teach my kids how to do it or to inspire them to do it. Like, we sometimes do that just because we're like, oh, but that's not leadership.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is develop these leadership skills and help others become the best they can be as well.
I love it so much. Okay. So you talk a little bit about there being 5 key areas that you focus on when you talk about motherhood leadership. And I would love to talk about those.
Yeah, well, there's actually a ton, which is why I had to narrow my paper down to, let's talk about listening. Okay. Like, listening is just one of many, many skills in leadership that is important. So I narrowed it down to 1 so we could focus on that and dig deep into that. I mean, there are so many that I could list, but we'll go with listening for today. Let me not go on a tangent here.
Okay. So let's focus on listening. And I appreciate that because I think sometimes the bite-sized things are what we're best able to internalize, right? When we can hear, my brain loves to always consume and hear all the things. And when I can just take in a small piece of it, I actually learn so much more. So I appreciate that you are giving us a consumable piece today.
I'm hoping that there's something actionable from this. So rather than just consuming, you can move forward with some information that is useful.
Well, for sure that will happen. It'll be I think it'll be a natural outcome of the conversation. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about listening. Tell me these things that you have learned and studied and incorporated into your programs.
Yeah. So I focused on 3 areas of listening, basically listening to yourself, listening to others, and listening to ask better questions. And then kind of went in depth on each of those. So where would you like me to go with that?
Oh, let's listening to yourself. Was that one of them?
Listening to yourself. Yeah. So that's where I started because that's the first place.
Yeah. We forget that. I don't think we realize that unless we can listen to ourselves, we really have a hard time being able to tune in and listen to other people.
There's the very basic level of like do a thought download, get all your thoughts onto paper, know actually what you're thinking. And when you do that, and I know I resist it too, I'm like, well, what's the difference between whether my thoughts are in my head or whether they're on paper? And yet when they're on paper, they're actual matter, and they actually matter. And then you can look at them as something separate from yourself, and you can think about them better. You can think about your thoughts. You can discover what feelings those thoughts are giving you, and you can change your thoughts or feelings instead of just having the same ones go swirling through your heads.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a baseline, like, know what you're thinking. Just dump it all on paper and go, oh, that's interesting. That's what I'm thinking. Is that what I want to be thinking? Is that useful to be thinking that? And then the second skill was knowing what you want. And as adults, and especially as moms, we often lose the ability to know what we want. And I think especially when our life is pretty good, that we think, well, I've got everything I want. What right do I have to ask for anything more? Like, my life is good. I'm not allowed to want anything more. But I was recently reminded that God delights to bless us. And there's a specific scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants, which I didn't put in my paper, but this is an LDS audience. So there's a specific scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants, which I don't have on the tip of my tongue. And that's what it says, that the Lord delights to bless us.
Mm-hmm.
And Corinthians says that eye hath not seen, nor hath ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for him, for them that love him. So I think it's okay for us to tune in to what we want and to ask for it. We have some underlying cultural beliefs that keep us from that too, that we think that somehow if we want something, we're selfish, or that if we want something, we're ungrateful. And I think that one, my favorite one to think about, that one is like, well, if you have one child and you want another child, are you ungrateful? Like, no, like, you totally can love your first child, think they're the greatest thing on earth, and still want another child. That's not being ungrateful. That's like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I want more of this amazingness. And then sometimes we just think that wanting is childish, like having a little temper tantrum, like, well, I want what I want, so da 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 da. But that's different than like tuning into what you want. I remember just hitting the point, and I think I talked about this last time I was on the podcast, where I had basically reached the goals that I set out as a child. Like, I had education, marriage, kids. I'm like, okay, I still have 70 to 80 years to live. There has to be something more to want. Exactly. Yes. It's okay to want more than that original goal. And it's the byproduct of going after what we want that requires us to change our mindset, to make connections with people, to do hard things. And that's where we grow. So it's not wrong to want something and to go after it, because you're going to learn and you're going to grow and you're going to become who you need to become, who God needs you to become, because you wanted something and went after it. It's almost irrelevant what you want.
Yeah, I was
and
just
you're allowed
say
to
that.
want what you want.
Yeah, that when we set a goal or we're trying to strive for something, it really, I like that you said it's irrelevant. It really isn't about the thing itself. It really ends up becoming about the process, about the person who is capable of getting that thing, the person that you create along the way so that you can have that.
Yeah. And even when we think like our kids' desires are silly or irrelevant, but the fact that they're going after something they want is relevant.
Yes.
So to try to not judge what we want or what our children want or what other people want, because that's not the point. The point is the getting there. And we may change our mind about what we want as we get there.
Yeah.
And we start that process of change and growth and development by wanting things.
And I think that changes our perspective too on the things that our children want, rather than just like poo-pooing their ideas, but like, okay, if this is something you want, we can help them achieve it, right? We can help them. We don't have to just give it to them, but helping them know how to make something happen or create something in their life is a lifelong useful skill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Ooh, so I'm like connecting the dots right there with the leadership qualities in like, us wanting things as a leader is what also helps us then be that servant leader in our own homes as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's super cool that science, like quantum physics, is now showing us that there's this universal field energy source to which we're all connected, that like we literally are all connected, and that we can tap into that source. One of my teachers at one of the immersions that I actually got to go to on campus emphasized the idea that everything is relevant and nothing is random. Now, I think that's a hard way to live life 24/7. Like if everything's relevant and nothing is random, you're like trying to pay attention to everything all the time. So even if it's not 100% of the time, I think that's an interesting thought to think about. We did a practice. Meditation is really popular these days, but we did a practice that was a little take on that, which was a conscious walk. And the idea was to just go out and walk and not have a planned destination, but just let nature guide you. And of course, I did it and I just felt silly. I'm like, where am I going? Nature's going to guide me and I'm going to learn stuff. But once I tried to release my resistance to this exercise, and then I really did start to notice things. And if you go through that walk with the idea of, okay, if everything is relevant and nothing is random on this walk, what am I learning? What is nature trying to teach me? What am I observing? How is that going to make a difference in my life? And so I noticed that I observed a lot more, and it was pretty cool, actually. When I finally found this place that I wanted to go, there were some symmetrical trees, and it looked like it was just this nice, cozy place to go sit. Of course, it was like 20 degrees outside when we were doing this, so it was cold. But so I went towards this table, and I found a table to sit down and journal. And as I sat at the table, there was one word on the table. Someone had etched in MARIAN. Now, it's not exactly my name, Marianne, but it was really close. So I took it as a sign that, like, I found my place. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I just sat there and journaled for a little while. And, nothing profound, life-changing happened, but it was still gets you into that meditative state, that paying attention to your own inner voice, connecting to source. It gives you food for thought for days to come. So that's an exercise that I think is an interesting one to do, just to get in touch with your inner voice and to get in touch with, the still small voice and the Holy Ghost and revelation. I think there's all sorts of levels of that. My voice, this universal field to which we're all connected, the Holy Ghost, direct inspiration. They're all relevant and they're all useful. So
I think because of our theology and many of us, our religious upbringing who might be listening today, it isn't too hard for us to grasp onto that belief that everything is relevant and nothing is random, because we do have this belief of a higher power, of a heavenly Father and a heavenly Mother who are always working in our favor. I just think this brings it down to even a little bit more microscopic view, right? Like to be looking not just for his occasional hand in things, but like his hand is in all the things. Nothing is random. Nothing is irrelevant.
So that's a different perspective even than I thought of it, because sometimes I get overwhelmed by that thought. I'm like, okay, if everything's relevant and nothing is random and I'm supposed to pay attention to everything all the time, I'm like, But I definitely think it's worth pondering, and it gives you new insights into yourself.
It's not overwhelming. It actually helps me release like this desire to micromanage so many things. It gives me actually a sense of freedom. So it's so interesting. Nice. And this just goes to show that it isn't the words that we speak or say. It's what we think about those things that then create our reality. And yeah, for you and I, we both had a totally different experience from that one little phrase. So
that was the listening to yourself part. And then the next thing I went into was listening to others. And servant leadership, motherhood leadership requires a deep commitment to listening to others. And my mother always taught me to listen with understanding. I remember her saying that all the time. So listening to others, of course, is a very powerful tool we can use as mothers. And I read a really compelling study while I was writing this paper. And it was about labor and delivery. And the research shows that a birth is experienced as primarily positive or negative, but it has less to do with the clinical aspects of it, like the length of the labor, the number of interventions required, or even the pain that the mother experienced, and much more to do with the emotional aspects. If she was listened to and felt respected and how she was treated, she had a better experience. There was a quote that said, suffering in labor results from not being respected, not being listened to, and not having basic needs met. Women can be in labor, can be in a lot of pain and not be suffering. They can also be suffering while experiencing very little pain. So the simple act of listening to mothers during labor and validating their experience totally changed their experience of labor on like a clinical level. So like imagine how powerful it is to listen to your child, to listen to your spouse, to listen to your friend, to listen to a neighbor. So often we give advice when all we really need to do is listen. And I just thought that was such a cool study that it actually made a clinical difference that moms were just listened to.
Yeah, for me, that was something that I've learned recently in my life, the last couple of years, because I would listen, but it was always to give a response, always to try to solve a problem. Because I'm kind of a solver. That's just my type of personality. And I came to realize that the reason I'm doing that is I don't necessarily like to feel uncomfortable for that person. Like I don't want to hurt. And so if I can fix their problem, then I won't hurt. Right. But being able to listen with understanding requires you to be capable of sitting and feeling the uncomfortableness yourself. It requires me to sit there and think, I can't solve this person's problem. It might hurt for me to watch them suffer for a little while, but I can sit with them in their suffering. I can sit and listen and be part of it rather than trying to fix it. And that's been a hard lesson for me to learn, but one that has been very useful for me to just listen for understanding, listen to purely listen, not just to solve.
Yeah. And another thing that we have to be really comfortable with, that as a society, we're very uncomfortable with, is silence. When we're listening, the silence is just as important as the words. Just like in music, if there was no silence between the notes, the music wouldn't have any meaning. Silence is also important in listening. We got to take a unique class where I wish I'd gotten to go to the immersion, but we had to do it on Zoom, where we conversed with Benedictine monks. We were supposed to go stay in the Abbey for 3 days, but we did it on Zoom. And so we learned a lot about this Benedictine monk tradition. And one of their rules early on was to control their tongues and remain silent, not speaking unless asked a question. Now, in modern day life, that's ridiculous. We would see it super extreme to not speak unless we were asked a question. But it got me thinking about, like, what are the benefits of this restraint of speech? Because as I said, as a society, we tend to fear silence, especially in a group setting. I think all of us know that from testimony meeting. But I love this quote from the educator Parker Palmer. He said, to abandon the notion that nothing is happening when it is silent, to see how much new clarity silence often brings. And another author pointed out that after you have a discussion, a solitary time is needed just for processing and cherishing what you've heard and understanding the other person. So if we can embrace silence, we can and see it as a friend rather than the awkward enemy that we often characterize it as, that it really is often in silence that our deepest understanding comes and that true solutions to problems are found.
Yeah, I also love that you use the word cherishing in there, because we don't often think of silence and cherishing in the same, because it does feel uncomfortable for us. But I think it's fascinating to think about it that way. I don't know. I'm going to give some thought to that, because there seems to be a powerful connection to me in there between silence and cherishing.
Yeah. He says to cherish the otherness of the person you've had the discussion with. Like, even if you don't agree, you can cherish the fact that you had this conversation, that they have their thoughts, that you have your thoughts, and use that silence to process it. And so I often think of that during testimony meeting now, like, it doesn't mean that nothing is happening in the silence.
Yeah.
People are learning, growing, thinking, developing. And if we never had silence, we wouldn't have that space for that to happen.
Yeah, it's a necessary thing.
So it's
a necessary part of relationship.
I think of silence as a part of listening. And I think you referred to it a little bit before. My last point was listening as healing, which fits in with that labor story as well. And another quote that I had written down, which was super powerful to me, is the power of feeling we are heard is what heals us. I don't have to fix the person. I just have to really listen. When we're heard and understood, that is healing in and of itself. Because as humans, we have this unique need to feel both like a unique individual and to feel part of a group. So we need that connection with others, but yet we need to be validated that what we think and feel is important on its own. So the simple act of listening is healing. And I just think that's fascinating.
For both people too, right? Like, not just for the person that's speaking, but it's healing for that person and it's healing for you as a listener. It's beneficial on both ends.
And that is one of the proven results of servant leadership, was healing for both parties involved.
I love it.
So the last section I went into was listening to ask better questions. Oh, there's so much good stuff on this.
This is something that I mean, even as a coach in my profession, right? Like, we just want to ask good questions. And with kids that don't like to communicate very well, asking a good question is golden. And so I always feel like, ooh, this is something I really always want to improve on, is just being able to ask better questions. So I'm listening.
Yeah.
Listening really well.
On this one, I referenced Wendy Watson Nelson a lot. She wrote a book called, oh, look, it's right here. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And she said, great questions can most motivate us to change because they invite us to reflect. They can help us see some part of ourselves or others or a situation that we've never been able to see before. She said, if you want to change your life, change your questions. If you want to have a great life, ask great questions. But I think you referred to this earlier, like, questions can be either affirming or detrimental. Like you said, like with the teenager, if you can ask the right question, you might actually get some information. But there's a big difference between a question like, why can't I trust you to do what you say you're going to do? Versus, what can I do to help you accomplish all the things that need to get done? The first one's just going to get you a defensive response and not going to get anywhere. The second one might actually get you a productive answer. So there's very appreciative or depreciative questions. And we want to frame things positively to get the desired outcome. One of the tools we learned was called Name It, Flip It, Frame It. I always thought it sounded like that Bop It game from the 80s.
Yes. Yes, I know.
So name it, flip it, frame it. First, you name it, like, what's your problem? What is it that you don't want? And then you flip it. Okay, so what's the opposite? What is it that you do want? And then you frame it positively. So what's the positive impact if that flip were to be true? And that can help you come up with the right way to frame a conversation. Like, I don't want my family to be late to church every week. Okay, so what's the opposite? I want my family to be in church, dressed and ready to go 5 minutes before services start. So what would be the positive impact of it? Well, mom would feel less stressed, less frazzled at church. Everyone would be calmer, leading to a happier day. So then after thinking that through, your conversation could be something like, I want to ensure that the family's calm and happy on Sundays because we spend the whole day together. And when we're late to church, I notice that the whole family seems to be more stressed out. So I want to do everything I can to help us have a good day as a family on Sundays. Do you have ideas that could help us get to church on time so that our Sundays start well? Is there something I can do to make that happen? Like, that's a whole different question than, why are you always late getting ready for church? So taking that time to think through how to positively frame a question beforehand can help you ask better questions.
It takes being willing to hold off for a second, not being able to, not just flippantly asking a question, but like taking a pause and thinking for a moment before you proceed, which is a little bit hard to do, but has some pretty big consequences, positive results if we can do that.
So that's one of those leadership skills we can work on building. Taking the time to pause before we ask the question so that we're not doing that knee jerk, why are you always late for church? Rather than the positively framing it. Because for the most part, on the deepest level, we all have the same goals. Like, your family wants to be happy and peaceful on Sunday. They're not purposely trying to be like, I want to have a terrible day with my family today. But if you come with, why are you always late to church?
Sometimes they are.
Probably. I don't think they're consciously getting up and being like, let's make this a terrible day. It might seem like it, but
it does seem like it sometimes, but I hear you. I do. I hear you.
And the other suggestion for listening to ask better questions was, I love this quote from James Autry. Whenever you attempt to make a statement, ask a question. Instead of saying, here's what you should do, you say, what do you think we should do? So I love that idea. And again, it takes a minute to step back instead of being like, I know the answer. Let's solve this problem right now. I've got the answer. There's a number of solutions that might work. Like, your answer might be one answer, but if the other person has an answer and it's going to work and it's powerful for them to come up with this solution and move forward with it, go for it. Like, let them have the solution rather than being so ego driven that, like, I came up with the best solution. We have to do it my way because I said so. Like, that's egotistical rather than leadership. So as mother leaders, especially, we would do well to help those we lead know that we hear them and see them and value them by asking for their input. Don't be the person who has all the answers. Be the person who has the best questions, and then you'll get the best answers.
That's good. That's really good. I think taking that pause so you can ask a good question, like anything, is going to be hard is going to feel hard when you're first starting something, but I am imagining that it also gets easier, right? Like with anything, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it'll become a little bit more natural to do that and become a little bit more instinctual.
So those are a lot of the ideas I got on listening. So listening to yourself with your thought downloads, knowing what you want, and listening to your inner voice, then listening to others and realizing the power of listening, like that labor story illustrates, allowing that silence and letting silence be a friend rather than an enemy, and listening as healing for yourself and others. And then finally, listening to ask better questions, knowing that questions can be affirming or detrimental. You can use the name it, flip it, frame it, and you can think about bop it while you do it. And then instead of making a statement, asking a question. So hopefully those are some useful tools that the audience can take away and try to apply in their own family.
Well, I have written down, if you guys could see me, which you can, if you want to go watch us on the YouTube channel, because we do post these to them. But I spent much of my time looking down, taking notes, because I have found this very interesting and very, some things that I really want to implement in my life. So thank you so much for sharing these things with us today, Marianne. Thanks for imparting some of your hard-earned wisdom, because you have been working hard in your schooling efforts. And I'm glad that we got to have you for a little bit of time in your busy schedule these days. But
Thanks.
Marianne, before we go, can you tell people where they can find more of you?
Yeah, so my website is Coaching with Marianne, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Coaching with Marianne. And my mission is to transform moms from janitors to CEO in their own homes and lives. And I do this by educating and working with moms one-on-one. And so if you're ready to join that mission and become a hero, leader, and CEO mom that you were meant to be, I would love to connect with you and help you reach your dreams. So I'm super excited about this topic and just seeing where it can go, because there's so much impact that mothers make, and making it on the next generation as well, which is why I love my target audience is usually young moms. I'll take any moms, but we have influence on ourselves and on the next generation. And then that next generation has influence on the next. So the power of a mom is just so profound. There's a poem that has the stanza, "The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world."
Well, Marianne, thank you so much. I appreciate this. And, we all have a mom. We all know moms. Many of us are moms, and so many of us need to hear this message. So I appreciate it. Yeah. We will link to all these things in the show notes, and we will look forward to seeing our audience next week. And thanks, Marianne, for being here. All right.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.